So I don't know if Joe Rogan put out a more nuanced and balanced opinion on cannabis, but just to address the public figure going online in front of millions of people and kids saying, it's just a plant, don't worry about it. Yeah, I think that's extremely destructive because the THC content in some strains might be way higher than the ones they're using. In addition to the fact that everybody has their own particular response based on who they are and how their brain is structured and what point in their development of their brain they are on. In addition to the fact that different people are trying to get different things out of life. If you're trying to be a mathematician, I find it to be a lot more likely to have detriment than if you're trying to be a comedian. And so there's all these variables that I think really need to be considered before you even talk about cannabis in front of millions of people and kids.
If anyone were to get into some stupid, weird brag ego battle with me about who has or is capable of smoking more weed, I would probably win. And I get it. When you're high with friends, it can be epically hilarious. So funny that it's epic. Or maybe you didn't have the best day and it's cold outside and you're feeling lonely, but then it's all good and the snow looks really, really cool. And it can make any moment more interesting and even great. But this is also the problem. The reason I'm particularly resentful of this drug at this point in my life is not just because of the mistakes that I've made with it and time I've thrown away using it and playing video games and playing online poker and just being a buffoon. It is also the effect it's had on people who used to be my friends, people who I care about, watching what it's done to them. 3 kids who I was best friends with when I was younger. Met them through sports leagues. They used to be these athletic, strong, enthusiastic, just bright-eyed kids. They all became drug dealers. None of them are enjoyable to speak to anymore because they are literally just slow. And they hang out with sketchy people. And I see them recently. I ran into 2 of them recently. They look like skeletons. And I think about when I first met these kids before they started smoking, before they went down this whole path. And it's sickening. Then there's some exceptionally talented basketball players, athletes in my city who were at the practices high, at the games high. They'd fail off the team. They're doing all the wrong things. And then there's others who were at a similar level of talent, but they just didn't get high. And some of them are absolutely thriving, playing Division I basketball, doing all these great things, not just with the same wrong people doing the same wrong things. And it's tragic. Then there's some girls who I hung out with at university, some of whom were absolutely convinced that weed was the cure and the savior to their anxiety. But I was absolutely convinced that it was the source of their anxiety or one of the main sources. I know that's all anecdotal. And again, if it helps people with certain conditions, good. Just voicing some frustrations that I bet some other people have similar experiences with.
Hey, Jeff, thank you very much for sharing your experience. It's definitely frustrating to see people that you care about, that you grew up with, have their potential and things that they could have been good at be sapped away by the consumption of some drug. And to see a culture that promotes it and shrugs it off is just all the more frustrating. So although I might be interested in exploring the idea of moderation and recreational use, or more likely therapeutic uses, I think it is really important, as Jeff, you said, and Sipiwe, you also mentioned, seeing directly firsthand experiences of people becoming complacent with their situations, even though they have a lot of potential and ability to use what they have to make a better future, build something new, create a life that they're proud of. And the mindless consumption of this drug is taking that away from a lot of people. And I think it's truly depressing, and we're going to see it at a larger scale now that it's becoming legalized and normalized everywhere. So Jeff, based on your personal experience, I have a question for you, if you're open to answering it, which is that in this modern age, we have a ton of sinks for our energy and potential. Things like video games, things like pornography, things like algorithmic media, and like I was waiting to get to this, but alcohol. I would argue that alcohol is also diminishing a lot of people's potential, but collectively as a society, it seems that we've accepted that with a reasonable threshold, like it's probably fine. I'm wondering, is there any characteristics of cannabis which make it such that it is a lot more dangerous and worth looking out for, as opposed to these other things I just listed?
Hey, Matt. Yeah, I agree. I would say what's uniquely dangerous about it is the overcorrection and the narratives about it from corny old oppositions of it's the devil's cabbage or the reality of people being incarcerated for ridiculously long times just for having it to now people saying, oh, it was good and fine and harmless all along and they tried to hide it and criminalize it and all this. It's that story that's dangerous, I think. And yeah, it's definitely becoming more normalized. Dispensaries are popping up on every block. I was at a Yankees game recently, and right outside the stadium in the streets, there's weed getting blown everywhere. And I'm like, it's the Bronx, whatever, I guess. But there's little kids walking around, and that's screwed up. And then I saw a police officer in uniform blowing trees. I don't know what world that's a good thing in. And everything I'm saying right now, I would have rolled my eyes at a couple years ago and probably been like, sounds like you need a joint. But who can look in the mirror and say, am I more intelligent, ambitious, energetic, everything good when I'm high or when I'm not high? The answer is obvious. And if you still don't care, that's fine. Do what you want. It's a free society.
That's a great point. When I first started investigating I was hard pressed to find any medical paper about cannabis use that was, say, from the 1970s or older that had anything positive to say about it. And in the 2000s and later, it's hard to find any paper on cannabis or any study that says anything really negative about it. Even within the scientific community, there is definitely a bias based on the social norms at the time towards whether cannabis is good or bad.
I really like that you gave that answer and brought up the social norm aspect, because I think that's like kind of the pivotal part of this argument here and has downstream effects, like the effects on the research papers, like Naval just said. But it's especially insidious because if you compare it to something like alcohol, where I think alcohol is a built-in error correcting mechanism where if you really overdo it, you could die on the spot, you could kill someone in a car accident, and at the very least, you just feel like you got hit by a truck the next day. So the effects are very immediately obvious, the negative consequences. But with cannabis, if you have society convincing you that, oh, it's perfectly fine, do it every day, then the effects start to slowly accumulate over months and years as your potential and ambition slowly start to wither away. I think that's really scary.